Yeah, time for another DraftScience video presentation. So we're going to do some more of this Cyrus Thornton. I'm more disappointed in these two other comments, so I'm just going to put them in one video, get it done with, because these are the weakest of the possible arguments you can make, and so I'll try to explain and just get it over with. That these arguments say nothing. There's no evidence in these arguments. Just like the fact that they don't provide any experimental evidence of anything, these aren't arguments. They're just empty. There's nothing to the argument. It's just an assertion, and the assertion has nothing to back it up. And I can explain. They'll keep saying that NASA does, and then they'll show you a NASA page that doesn't have a damn thing to do with the subject. But anyway, okay. So this one starts off. What does proof require? So that was my video. So apparently this is a response to my video on Piro's channel. Fine. And he says not, whatever that's supposed to mean. Alright, pure fiction presented in the form of personal opinion based on junior high school interpretation. So that's your opinion. I could say the same thing. You've got a really tiny small mind, and you really haven't you haven't put all these ideas together to create something called a coherent theory of reality. So yeah, you have it all messed up. You have a bunch of unreal parts in your real physics, and therefore aren't seeing anything the right way. But anyway, real world utility. So again, we'll have no example of the real world utility in the form of a real experiment where they really collect the actual energy. All right. Like I said, it's as simple as, again, the 10-ton train going 5 miles an hour, a 5-ton train going 10 miles an hour. There's no way they're ever going to show an experiment where those two trains move a different amount of mass, or total mass. That in some way, if you calculate all the heat and all the deformation and all the movement they create, that they too won't create exactly the same amount of movement. That if you had to measure their capacity to create force, that force would have to be overcome by exactly the same amount of gasoline, or the same amount of TNT, or the same amount of jet fuel. No matter what you use as a stopping force, as long as that stopping force, you can calculate exactly how much energy it used. That is, it's not biased, or you understand the bias. They're going to do the same thing. They have the same capacity to move atoms in the universe. Period. And they'll never produce any evidence that those two trains don't move the same mass in the universe. Alright. So that's the challenge, is to come up with real evidence. And you can't, because your theory's wrong. So even though you've had a huge advantage over me, in the sense you've had millions of scientists doing millions of experiments over hundreds of years, you can't compile a single piece of real evidence. Alright, kinetic energy has been verified and validated mathematically. So that means absolutely nothing, because as I'm demonstrating, you can't even get basic concepts of math anywhere close to coherent or correct. He's going to argue this stupid scalar vector argument again. And it's so on its face stupid, because it can't possibly be a real argument. Okay, what a vector means is that the quantity, you're saying there's an amount of something and it has a direction. They're saying that kinetic energy, unlike momentum, like momentum says, yes, I'm going this way or I'm going that way. They're saying that kinetic energy doesn't have a direction, when clearly every example you'll ever use, it always has a direction. The train has a direction. Its kinetic energy is in a direction. Its kinetic energy isn't everywhere in the universe. The 10-ton train going down the track only has energy in one direction. It doesn't have energy going that way. It doesn't have energy that way, up, down. It doesn't have energy any direction. It clearly only has energy in a direction. Just like momentum, it's exactly the same thing. So when they sit there and say it's a scalar, what are you talking about? It's not a scalar. It doesn't lack direction. And it clearly, every time they're going to do the equation, they establish, well, going left is, we're going to call that negative, and we'll call this positive. They do it, and every single time they do the equation, they know where to put the negative signs, and you do the same thing. Momentum doesn't tell you which way is plus or minus. There's no which way. It doesn't say ahead of time. Momentum doesn't say ahead of time. Left means positive, right means negative. No, you have to establish that. So they're exactly the same. There's absolutely no justification for calling one a scalar and calling the other a vector quantity. They are exactly the same thing. There's absolutely no difference. And you can see it. Just because you put a 1/2 in front of the MV and a square on the V, you can obviously understand I haven't made a wildebeest. I haven't turned it into a penguin. It's not some completely different thing. No, it's the same thing. It's just an equation telling you take the mass and the velocity and do certain things with them, plus, minus, divide, and you'll come up with an answer. It's exactly the same equation. It has the same information in it. I mean, this is such a stupid argument. But anyway, let's get to the rest of it. All right. Okay, been mathematically... Okay, so that's just nonsense. The math is just contrivance. Okay, so they've never mathematically proven that the 10-ton train has half the energy of the 5-ton train. There's no math that can prove that. All right, experimentally validated, so that's the hugest of the lies. They have absolutely zero experimental evidence of this extra energy ever being collected, or this less energy, whatever you want to call it. You didn't show me where the trains lost half the energy. You didn't show me the heat. You didn't show me, the explosion. It's a hell of a lot of joules of energy. You didn't show me where all this energy disappeared to. So just a big fat lie. Okay, and integrated into mechanical systems producing energy since the beginning of the Industrial Revolution. So just more vague references to how they couldn't have possibly invented anything or accomplished anything without mv squared, which is, again, just a big pile of shit. All it can do is get in the way, frankly, because it's giving people wrong answers. If you think the 10-ton train going 5 miles an hour has half the energy, okay, you're not thinking very smart or real or correct. And if you're engineering a collection system that's going to collect the energy from these two trains, something that trains are going to bang into, you're not going to do it right if you actually think the faster train has more real energy. Because it doesn't. All it has is an advantage in terms of friction. And that's it. It can overcome friction easier than the heavy train can. That's it. All right, in a sophisticated way and beforehand in rudimentary devices. So again, just more absolute nonsense. It wasn't true 300 years ago. It still isn't true. It's not a fact of reality. It's absolute crap, blah, blah, blah. The real world uses KE. So what? The real world thinks God exists, frankly. Okay, lots of people think silly things. They think there's multiverses. They think you can have a fourth dimension. They really think it somehow fits. All the dimensions have right angles to each other, and somehow there's room for a fourth one somewhere. No, there isn't. Newsflash. So yeah, people believe in lots of silly shit. And this just happens to be one of the stinkiest and smelliest bits sitting right there in the middle of your physics. A big, fat, stupid totem pole saying, just mocking you, essentially just saying, gee, you humans can't do anything right, can you? You have to fuck everything up with religious crap. And that's all this was invented for. It was invented by a religious kook who thought Newton's physics was too austere, didn't have enough fun in it. That's it. Live with that. Live with the physics you're defending, which is just religion. Okay, it's just a dogma. Your KE, magic dogma. Okay, is the ultimate proof. Okay, so the real world uses KE as the ultimate proof. So the real world, I'm arguing, doesn't. NASA didn't use KE. It's a NASA computer that figured out all the navigating for the lunar module to land on the moon. I bet you there wasn't one KE in there at all. It was just about momentum. It was just about speed and mass. Okay, and the forces of, obviously, gravity. Hence, it works in the real world. Hence, you have no evidence. So, hence, you just keep saying, hence, we proved it. No, hence, you didn't prove it. The proof doesn't exist. You still can't put any in my hand. Nothing. All right, please do not take my uncredentialed word for it. Yes, it is uncredentialed. And please don't take any other person's uncredentialed word for it. What do they have to take a word for? You're saying it's a scalar, not a vector. Okay, where did you prove that? Where did you say anything? Where's the proof that it's a vector? What about it makes it a scalar? What makes the kinetic energy formula scalar? I mean, let me just write it down. I mean, this isn't that complicated, right? Okay, we have the theory of mv, and then we have the theory, that equals energy. And then we have the theory that energy equals 1/2, okay? And I could just make it simple, right? V, mv. Now, somehow this is a magical scalar, and this is somehow, a vector. So, but the simple argument is that this is understood somehow magically, okay? If I do this and this to it, then we can understand this to be, these are two vectors, okay? Now, it doesn't look that way when anybody writes it, right? Nobody writes it that way. Momentum isn't stated that way. This is how momentum is written. Or sometimes just a P. Okay, so that's how it's written. So what are you saying? This is automatically telling you, it's a quantity, and the quantity has a direction. Okay, so I put the tip on the arrow. Quantity plus a direction. Somehow this isn't a quantity and a direction. It's just a quantity. So it's just an amount, but it doesn't go anywhere. So it's just we use some little special symbol for it. When we know that every single example, it's a vector. It's going in a direction. It doesn't have kinetic energy in every direction. Nothing has kinetic energy in every direction. So this is just absolute nonsense that this formula somehow is fundamentally different than this formula. How are they fundamentally different? How is this fundamentally different? Oh, that's right. It's not. So it's just absolute nonsense. You could see that, right? Well, let's just hope you could. Good enough. You get the point. All right, please don't take any other person's uncredentialed word for it. So again, this credential crap, when we have highly credentialed physicists talking absolute wooey baby talk, okay, about their multiverses and other crap that they just made up and they have zero proof for, and we're supposed to just waste our time listening to their fantasies, because that's all they are. They're just fantasies. There's no credible evidence demonstrating any good reason to believe. No good reason to believe. It's just a story they like telling. Okay, for beginners' curiosity, to confirm the use of kinetic energy in our modern systems, go to the 2 links that are included in this comment. So 2 links that are completely on, no subject that you could glean any information about kinetic energy from. One of them is escape velocity, and it barely has the formula in the very bottom of the whole slop. Okay, and it obviously isn't telling you how many joules of energy it takes. So it's just based on the fact that they're not giving you a fuel suggestion. So they don't solve the equation. They just provide the equation, assuming that kinetic energy has something to do with it. But there's absolutely nothing critical here. No one's measuring anything. Look, if I can measure how much fuel something has, I could say, right? I mean, this is how just silly this whole thing is that, if I say there's a gallon of gasoline, and I want to know how much power does the gallon of gasoline have, right? Well, what do? I push something with it, okay? I move a car, do something else, and I try to figure out all the losses, and I say, how much can I get out of a gallon of gasoline? How many miles can I move a mass with the gasoline? Well, if I've already assumed, okay, the kinetic energy formula is a correct description of the energy that I'm creating, then obviously I'll come up with a silly answer for how many joules are in the gasoline. So if I end up with my kinetic energy formula says, I moved the mass a certain velocity in a certain time. So I take the mass, I move it a velocity, and that takes a certain amount of time. And I say that equals, okay, KE. You can't see that, right? Not likely. All right. I'll be more responsible. So I come up with a number, and I say, well, it has to be, 600 joules of energy, 666 joules of energy. That's what it requires to move that. Well, I say, well, then that's what gasoline has. That's what a gallon of gasoline has, but that's what I used, a gallon of gasoline. So a gallon of gasoline has 666 joules of energy in it. I could do the same thing with momentum. I could just say, well, the momentum comes out to be 300 joules. Okay, so if I use momentum, get my m times v, okay, m times v times 2.3, that'll give me a joule number. So I just use that joule number. I say a gallon of gasoline has 300 joules in it. That's all they're doing. There's no thing. They didn't empirically, they didn't in some precise way figure out how many joules are in anything. They find out how many joules are in it by making something move. And if they have exaggerated notions of how much it moves, well, then they're obviously going to get silly answers. And the funny thing is you could just do this, right? Let's force them to move the 10-ton train, and then let's force them to move the 5-ton train. And the joke will be, if they're using this formula to, the kinetic energy formula to figure out how many joules of gasoline are in here, they're going to get two different numbers. They're going to get 250 and 500. Okay, so one day the gasoline has 500 joules, the next day it only has 250 joules. And that's the joke of this. So he hasn't shown any evidence of how this isn't all just circular crap. Just made up numbers. No one has to be accountable for. So in real engineering, he hasn't shown any of this working. No real world example of it working. All right. The first source from NASA, and you'll see that they use both. So again, just more nonsense. So one source was escape velocity. It had nothing to do with making an actual ship. So it's just about, it's easier from orbit because you don't got to go through the atmosphere, blah, blah, different things like that. But just has nothing to do with it. The kinetic energy equating Newton's universal law of gravitation. I don't even know why we're calling it Newton's law, right? It is just the fact that we already know what gravity is, okay? It's a constant force, and it's completely affects you proportional to your mass. So the more mass you have, the more gravity you experience. Is that simple. To determine orbital velocities and escape velocities. Right, it has absolutely nothing to do with the kinetic energy formula. All of that had nothing to do with kinetic energy. Read the NASA page and learn the basics. Well, the basics didn't have any kinetic energy in them at all. The second source is a propulsion hobby website that demonstrates how the U.S. Air Force uses kinetic energy to calculate performance and maneuverability of U.S. Air Force fighter jets. So another big fat pile of shit. It had absolutely nothing to do with it. It was barely in the article. One sentence, okay, no equations done. It was just using kinetic energy, the word kinetic energy, to make a comparison between kinetic and potential. Basically just talking about the fact that you constantly are moving against gravity or with gravity. So those are the yin-yangs of flying an airplane, is really just using your force against the gravitational force. And then you have all the atmospheric effects. Again, you'll see 1/2 mv squared in Newtonian mechanics in the form of mgh. So there's obviously no 1/2 mv squared involved in mgh. So again, why he wouldn't even say something like this in the form of mgh? There's no 1/2 mv squared in mass times the gravitational constant times height. Okay, it doesn't exist in that. So another pile of nonsense. And clearly, your mass is going to be critical. But anyway, it just points out how fundamental to what's going to happen with any of these forces that are constant forces is that it's completely dependent on how much mass you have. Please note that neither of the applications use P equals mv. Neither of the applications solve for anything, and none of the applications have anything to do with creating energy to actually cause an effect. So none of them are connected to any real world requirement to talk about how many joules of energy it is, or any of that crap, or how much energy you have, or any of that. None of it's in any of these pages. All right, because momentum and energy are two different quantities, and again, you'll never explain what the fuck that could possibly mean to a reasonable human being. So I'm just saying, are you a reasonable human being out there? What the fuck could momentum possibly be if it isn't a description of energy? If momentum isn't what you give to bowling pins, like I hit a bowling pin with my momentum and I move the bowling pin, what the hell is momentum if it's not my capacity to move things? What is it then? What the fuck is it? How the fuck can people say this sentence and it doesn't? How can it make any sense? Because momentum and energy are two different things, different quantities. How can they be different quantities? How is it possible for them to be different quantities? They're two different descriptions of reality. You have to believe in one or believe in the other. They are conflicting descriptions of reality. One says 300 joules, one says 666 joules. It's completely different descriptions of reality. All right, one theory says you can shoot a bullet. Okay, I can shoot a dime 1,000 miles an hour with the same energy that I shoot 2 kilograms 1 mile an hour. So one theory says that's possible. I use the same amount of energy. I can make 2 kilograms go 1 mile an hour, and I can make a dime go 1,000 miles an hour with the same quantity of energy. The other theory says, okay, the 2 kilograms only takes 1 joule, and the dime going 1,000 miles an hour takes 1,000 joules. There's a 1,000 difference in how much energy I need to create the two effects. The bullet requires 1,000 times more. The dime takes 1,000 times more energy to move at 1,000 miles. 1,000 miles an hour. 1,000 times as much energy as the 2 kilograms moving 1 mile an hour. Those are two fundamentally different theories of reality. You can't get that. You can't. How the hell can any of you morons say there's some kind of compatibility between Newton's physics and Leibniz's physics? There's absolutely no compatibility. They're completely contrary descriptions of reality. If you use the kinetic energy formula to navigate space, you won't put your thrusters on the same amount of time. You can't do the same thing. You can't land on the moon, for example. You can only crash into the moon. And that's the facts. One of them will work and one of them won't work. So which one do you believe NASA in 1969 used? Do you think they really used the kinetic energy formula, or do you think they used momentum? Because momentum works. So when they said they used Newton's physics, what do you think they mean? They used Leibniz physics? They used de Châtelet physics? How come they aren't saying that, if that's what they were using? All right. Newton's definitions, semantics have been modernized. So he's calling it semantics. A 1,000% difference, a 1,000 times difference description of what energy can do, right? It's 1,000 times different. The dime going 1,000 miles an hour, the 2 kilograms going 1 mile an hour. 1,000 times different description of how that can happen. And you're going to sit there and say it's semantics. It's clearly not semantics. You say the 10-ton train going 5 miles an hour has 1/2 the capacity to change things in the world. You say the tiny wrecking ball, okay, tiny one. Use a really tiny wrecking ball, because the tiny wrecking ball will have so much more energy. Just too stupid. All right. Definition semantics have been modernized into the semantics of scalar and vector quantity. So again, that I'll say is just semantics. You're just playing the silliest of word games. There's no way to possibly put numbers into the equation and say, look, this is a scalar number and this is a vector quantity number. They're both obviously vectors. No way around that. It's just one of the most... this is the silliest of your technical contrivances to try to evade reality, is to play some game that you've declared it a scalar and therefore somehow it doesn't have a direction. That somehow the plane doesn't have a direction. That the train doesn't have a direction. The bowling ball doesn't have a direction. Of course, the energy is in a direction. The bowling ball doesn't have any energy going backwards. The bowling ball doesn't have any energy going straight up. It doesn't have any of those vectors. So how can it be a scalar? All right, per Newton, momentum is a vector quantity. So here it is. Just he's saying these silly, idiotic words, okay? And per reality, kinetic energy is a vector quantity. Exactly the same thing. It's amount of energy in a direction, period. Same thing. Today, energy has been verified as a scalar quantity. How'd you do that? How did you prove that the energy is going in all directions? Or any direction? It can be in any direction. The train can be moving in any direction, 500 miles an hour. It doesn't have to go in one direction. It can go in any direction. Bullshit. I mean, just insane bullshit. Okay, any dispute with these quantities being separate and different quantities is a violation of Newtonian mechanics. So somehow he says Newton made this law. Well, Newton made the law that the equation he never saw, the 1/2 mv squared, right? All he saw was mv squared. The equation he never saw, and Newton knew right away, oh, that one's a scalar and mine's a vector. He knew that. He said that somewhere. So that's just a preposterous lie that this has anything to do with violating anything Newton thought or anything Newton said. Newton wouldn't be stupid enough to think mv squared was a scalar. It could be in any direction. I'm sure Newton knew that the alternative theory was that the energy is still going in the same direction. What a pile of shit. Okay. You better have pretty good math. So again, they keep doing this. You know, like the math is everything. And you can just see how they just cheated grotesquely. They've just cheated. Okay, they use these silly little math concepts to try to knock everybody off balance. Okay, scalar and vector quantity, and they're pretending they're somehow different things, and somehow you can't possibly, one can't be disguised as the other, and it's not a big game they're just playing. When of course it's just a game they're playing. So this is how much they care about the truth. I mean, to use this kind of stupid, idiotic semantics word game, and it's a word game made of absolute nothing. Like I said, there's nothing special about anything called a scalar. A scalar just means that, yes, the energy can go be in any direction. Like the sun is producing energy in a scalar form, okay? It's producing energy in every direction. All right, you better have pretty good math and science to upgrade Newton's validated science. So again, more validated. Somehow mv squared is Newton's science. Now you can see how just insidious this is, right? For these assholes to say Leibniz's science is Newton's science. And that somehow nobody's here to protect Newton. You know, no one's arguing. I'm not a big fan of, you know, historical figures. I don't really want the role of defending anybody. But just look how insidious this is. The guy who stole Newton's calculus created a whole embarrassing controversy. I mean, Newton hated drama. He hated it. Okay, so he gets into all this stupid drama. He has to ask other people to work into his defense because he's not going to sit there and waste his time defending himself. And so they have to have this whole trial and absentia kind of thing to decide whether, you know, Newton gets to have his calculus as his thing, and he has to be embarrassed into saying, I would like the credit for it because I actually did the hard work. Okay, and he has to go through all that crap. And this scumbag who stole his calculus, and that's what they decided, you know, he comes up with this mv squared thing, and now you people are tagging this as Newton's physics. His worst enemy in life invents this pile of steaming shit, okay, that was 100% inaccurate by even modern standards. It was 100% inaccurate. And you think Newton should have said, oh, yeah, great job. Thank you for finding the truth, Mr. Leibniz. Bullshit! I mean, people are disgusting. I mean, it's disgusting how you play with dead people in this disgusting manner. Okay, so NASA, this is absolutely nothing on this webpage. Why won't these links work? This is really, I mean, it's so irritating. I have to actually cut and paste the fucking link. I mean, that's really annoying. Ugh, this goddamn computer. Yeah, goodbye to you. 3 clicks, right? All right, I seem to have accomplished the task. Okay, so this is all about escape velocity. Okay, so there's no mv squared in this thing in any substantial way, in any meaningful way at all. You go all the way down to the very last little bit, and there's a little tiny, okay, deriving escape velocity using calculus. And this is where they introduced the work function. So we're back to this whole idiotic idea that force times distance means something somewhere, okay, in terms of energy. And it only means something in this context, okay, where there is a constant force. So this is the irony. This is the only context where it actually works because gravity is a constant force. All right, and so now you're trying to do the calculus of adding up what's your total amount of energy you used through the whole process of fighting gravity through the whole length of the distance you traveled fighting gravity. All right, and then they have this little bit here. Well, now we're going to use the work function because we defined the work function based on kinetic energy. Now we're going to derive the kinetic energy formula out of the work function. But there's no answer to anything. There's just the statement in the end. So there's nothing, this isn't in any way integral. They could say any number here. They could say, oh, it's a total of 50,000 joules. Or they could say any number and it wouldn't make any difference to you, because all the fuels are based on the kinetic energy formula. So they're all inflated values in joules. So there's no reference here. And I could do exactly the same thing with using momentum. I could derive how many joules of fuel are in the fuel using momentum. So I see how much momentum it creates in an object and then define the joules based on the momentum created. And then I can just apply it to any circumstance to say, well, this is how much energy you get out of that much momentum. So I could do exactly the same thing. None of it is integral to anything. It's not vital. It's not important. It doesn't mean anything. It doesn't say anything. Now this one is really stupid because this has absolutely, I mean, really, there's just, I mean, this one's already obscure enough in having anything to do with kinetic energy. It just has to do with escape velocity and how much speed you need to escape. And this one is about fighter aircraft, you know, navigating, you know, playing whatever that is, you know, Tom Cruise movie bullshit. Just has nothing to do. So the only reason kinetic energy is being used is to contrast potential energy. It has nothing to do with the kinetic energy formula. They're just using the word kinetic energy to contrast against potential energy. So this is another part of where physics is so broken, right? It's because terms are so abusable. Because now we're stuck with kinetic energy as a way of distinguishing between potential energy and free energy, right? And now that concept is broken because they put the word kinetic in front of it. Everybody thinks this means the kinetic energy formula, when no, all it means is momentum also. Momentum is free energy, you know, energy actualized, moving. So the word potential has screwed up, you know, even, you know, this kind of simple thing. So the formula is in here in one place, and you know, it's not used for anything. It doesn't apply to anything. Like I said, the whole conversation is just your pitch and how much time it takes to evade the, you know, how much time you need in gravity to make a turn. Has nothing to do with kinetic energy. So here it is, 1/2 mv squared. But it doesn't mean anything, right? An aircraft's specific energy, the unit of weight, and total energy arrived through its weight plus thus. So none of this has anything to do with the fact that you already know how much momentum it can have and how much you can, how many G's you can turn, and all the rest of that doesn't have anything to do with this fake joule number you're going to get for kinetic energy. So that's the only reference in the whole thing. So, you know, just pure crap to bring this up as if this is somehow a meaningful proof that kinetic energy is real, that the kinetic energy formula gets right answers. Nothing. There's nothing in here. No evidence at all that 10-ton trains going 5 miles an hour have half as much energy. No evidence of that at all. All right. These real-world utilities are verification of kinetic energy. So again, you saw it. There was no verification of kinetic energy in that paper. Forget it. I read the whole damn thing. It's a pile of shit. It's not even interesting in terms of, you know, Top Gun kind of intrigue. You know. All right. And so then he says it again. Scalar and vector quantities. So again, more absolute nonsense. Doesn't mean a damn thing. These are words they just pulled out of their asses. I mean, this doesn't mean a damn thing. Both equations are describing exactly the same thing. They're describing an amount of movement in a direction. And you can't say they're doing anything other than that. The kinetic energy formula is describing an amount of motion in a direction. Momentum is describing an amount of motion in a direction. Period. These verifications disagree with one commentary in the video. So clearly they don't. They prove nothing. They don't contradict a damn thing I said. They don't prove anything I said is incorrect. So screw you. Who do you think is correct? NASA. So again, NASA hasn't overtly sent any paper out saying, yes, we use the kinetic energy formula to decide how much thrust to shoot out of the spacecraft to land on the moon. There is no statement from NASA saying that. So just keep lying about NASA. Who do you trust? People who lie about NASA, or people who say, oh, well, let's wait and see if we can actually find some evidence of that? Yeah, I wouldn't trust these people who are telling you what NASA did and what NASA says when they haven't provided a single quote from NASA or a single piece of evidence from NASA. I'm saying, I bet you, okay, I'll bet you some real money. You know, just as it would just be a curiosity, right? Of all this, the programming stuff inside of the lunar module computer, all the information in that computer system, I bet you not one bit of it had mv squared in it. Because it would be useless. It wouldn't do them any good at all. Navigating in space, that formula will do you no good at all. Okay, or this video's personal interpretation. So again, it's not personal interpretations, it's personal accusations and contentions that your physics is unfounded, it's unevidenced, and it's illogical. It makes absolutely zero sense. I put lighter and lighter things on a spring and somehow I make more and more energy. Now Piro doesn't think so, but somehow he doesn't think the spring can make anything but 0.4. Okay, you know, 1.4 is actually just a 0.4 increase. So he thinks this, I make the mass half as much. So I put half as much mass on the spring. And he's saying it's not like it, you know, so this goes, you know, the full 1. Okay, this mass goes the full 1. He's saying this one goes, it goes only 0.4 faster. So even though it's half as much mass, it only goes to 0.1 and then it only goes 4 point more. It doesn't even go a half more. It just goes 0.4 more. So that's all it gets as an advantage. So this whole distance doesn't mean anything. So the thing that both of them go up and this one goes 0.4 more. That's it. He thinks that's reality. He thinks he could land on the moon with that logic. I say he's got no chance. Alright. So where was I? Ugh, I don't want to do this over again. Alright. The personal interpretations on YouTube very... yeah, that's where I left off. The personal interpretations in this YouTube video are not science but fiction. So that's just your assertion. And you've demonstrated with zero evidence. So you've provided no reason for me to believe in the mv squared theory. The history tells me it's a pile of shit because the history is horrible. You didn't even fix it. It was 100% wrong as an answer for 100 years. You sat there with a theory for 100 years that gave you 100% wrong answers. Okay, and it took you 100 years to figure out, oh, well, maybe we ought to stick a half in front of it. Alright, anyway, drawing lines on a video to confirm P equals mv. Well, that's not what I'm confirming, but obviously if you have some doubt that momentum equals mv, okay, is not groundbreaking. Well, it's pretty groundbreaking to suggest, again, as I have suggested, that your physics is so unrigorous, is so undisciplined, is so sloppy, is so bad, that for 300 years you have a totem pole right in the middle of it. You have this stinking pile of crap. Not a single shred of good evidence defending it. It is defended. It is ferrocell Ken Wheeler nonsense. It's like physics actually saying, Ken Wheeler's right. The light is being bent by magnetism. The ferrocell proves it. It's exactly like that happening in physics. And for 300 years, you're sitting there looking at your stupid ferrocell. Well, the lighter thing goes 4 times as high in gravity. It must have more energy, right? I mean, it's really, really dumb. All right, you've made an incredibly stupid mistake. And it's right there in the middle of your physics. And here you are defending it. Why? Why are you defending something that has a terrible history and has zero evidence supporting it? Why are you defending it? Because you have no integrity, that's why. Okay, showing that quantity of motion is a vector quantity was known in the 17th century. So again, he keeps using the same dodge. Oh, I'll throw them off by saying vector quantity, and that somehow they're not going to realize that a vector quantity means an amount in a direction. And that Yeah, of course, the kinetic energy formula is an amount in a direction. So yeah, of course, it's exactly the same thing. Oh, God, you people are just such conniving weasels. All right, to take that and invalidate Newtonian mechanics. So again, he's saying it's Newton's physics. Okay, 1/2 mv squared is Newton's mechanics, when clearly invented by his worst fucking enemy in life. I mean, can you get more ironic? This is as ironic as the morons who say things like, "Well, Einstein invented entanglement." It's just as moronic. I mean, it's just as moronic. And, but that's what physics actually is doing, right? Oh, man, you people are pathetic. Okay, by merging a vector quantity with a scalar kinetic energy is detached from reality. So it's detached from reality for me to expose the simple truth that clearly the kinetic energy formula produces a vector quantity. It clearly you can't use the formula unless you establish that the energy is in a direction. You can't do a single thing with the formula unless you understand what direction the things are moving that have the kinetic energy. If you don't know what direction the kinetic energy is moving in, you can't possibly do the math. So it's just too fucking stupid. It's such a silly, stupid lie to sit there and pretend, oh, kinetic energy is ambiguous about which direction the energy is in. It can't be ambiguous. There's no way you could ever solve the equation if it was ambiguous. Oh, I just can't believe they're this despicable. All right, and to do it over and over again, just to keep saying it over and over again, like this is a real, I got you with this vector scalar thing. No, you don't got anything. You've got absolutely nothing in your hand as evidence. All right. There was no valid science demonstrated in the video interpretation overturning the validated physics of vector and scalar quantities. So again, just an opinion. Well, it's not just my opinion. Go look up the two fucking words and you'll find out that, yeah, all it means, a vector quantity just means that you know both the direction and the magnitude. And a scalar means you don't know the direction. So clearly you know the direction in the mv squared formula. So why were they calling it a scalar when it's not a scalar? It's not ambiguous about direction. The direction isn't all directions. The direction is one direction. The train has kinetic energy in a specific direction. No doubt about it. The spaceship has kinetic energy in a specific direction. The bullet goes in a specific direction. There's absolutely no way you can call that a scalar. All right. An example of this lack of understanding can be heard in the video's commentary. The conclusion is the implication that the 1/2 scalar, so it keeps doing it, in the kinetic energy is derived from twice the mass. So that's just a pile of shit. I never said any such thing ever. I said it was derived from the fact that acceleration in gravity, okay, so gravity accelerates you to 9.8 meters per second. But you get to that velocity. So you get to the complete velocity, but you only travel 4.9 meters. That's why there's a 1/2 in the equation, is because your acceleration rate, okay, is half the distance of your actual velocity rate. If you were moving at your actual velocity, 9.8 meters, you would move 9.8 meters in a second. But somehow you only travel 4.9 meters in a second, even though you're going 9.8 meters a second as an average speed. As your final velocity. So your final velocity doesn't match your accelerated velocity. And that's why the 1/2 is in the equation. That's what I've said, jackass. I didn't say anything like any of this shit you're typing in this fucking pile of shit. Okay. All right. So then he says, the conclusion... An example of lack of understanding in the video's commentary. The conclusion is that the implication that 1/2 scalar in the kinetic energy is derived from twice the mass. So exactly, I never said anything like that ever. 4 times the velocity. What I've said is, yes, clearly, when you go 4 times higher in gravity, you only get twice the velocity out. Implication. 1/2 is the constant scalar. So that's not anything I said, I clearly pointed out the 1/2 only exists because this formula was primarily created as for adding up a constant force over time, and none of these kinetic examples of things banging into each other have anything to do with constant forces. So that's why it's totally inappropriate. But clearly the 1/2 is a derivative of the fact that acceleration, you only travel half the distance in the process of accelerating. But if you paid attention during the demonstration of 3 times the mass, so I don't even know what he's talking about there. The commentary is 3 times the mass, so I don't even know what I have no clue what this could possibly, 3 times the mass, where did that come up anywhere? 1/3 the velocity. I don't even know what this is. Thus, the fictitious interpretation is 1/2 the scalar in 1/2 mv squared. Why not 1/3 as the constant scalar? Well, clearly it is turned into all kinds of different numbers when they start changing it into a spring constant. So what the spring constant is really doing is modifying that 1/2. So the k of the spring constant is really just a modifier telling you you're in a different circumstance than gravity, and now the proportions will be different. The force isn't constant. It gets stiffer, the spring gets stiffer, and it gets weaker. And so now you don't have a consistent 1/2. You have some other vector that defines the spring constant, and so you have to have a modifier for that 1/2. Okay, but clearly in gravity you're not going to be able to change the 1/2. And as I pointed out, none of these experiments have anything to do with constant forces. So creating this idiotic notion that you're creating a force vector when you're not. The force doesn't have a distance line. The force is just an amount of force. A coasting anything just has an amount of momentum. It has its mass times its velocity. It doesn't have any of this other crap you think exists. All right, what if the mass is 9 times greater? Why not 1/9 the constant scalar? So again, he first falsely says where I derive the 1/2 from, where I explain where the 1/2 comes from. I clearly explain it, and it's the truth throughout where it comes from. When they say F equals ma, they've changed Newton's physics from F equals change in momentum over change in time. So they've changed that into ma instead of mv over time, and by doing that, okay, they've turned it into acceleration. So acceleration is 1/2. So that's where the half comes from. All right, why is this commentary suggesting half of the constant scalar? So what is this, the same thing again? The answer is because 1/2 is verified scalar in KE. Verified by what? And again, let's understand, the formula Leibniz created didn't have a half in it. All right. And the commentary is using a self-serving interpretation of Newton's observation. So now he's saying this is somehow, again, Newton's observation. Somehow Newton observed there's some legitimacy to this nonsense. When Newton didn't observe any of this crap, he didn't like any of this crap, he didn't suggest any of this crap, and he didn't use any of this crap. Okay. Newton's derivation of the quality of motion in his to his ends. So again, this is not a Newton's derivation. This is not Newton's observation. This has absolutely, again, Newton saw and predicted accurately using momentum. So let's understand, there was nothing broken. Nothing was broken in Newton's physics, and the only reason why this stupid formula exists is because a stupid religious kook didn't like that Newton's physics wasn't religious enough. There wasn't enough God in it. So he had to make it more interesting. Okay, so he had to magnify energy preposterously. And that's all it is. The kinetic energy formula is just a preposterous exaggeration of energy. Okay, it has nothing to do with the velocity calculation P equals mv, or 9.8 meters per second. So again, who are you making the accusation against? I obviously don't think the gravitational constant has anything to do with your silly formula beyond the fact that your derivation, okay, of talking about acceleration instead of talking about momentum requires the 1/2. Okay, this video's commentary is pure flawed linear correlation in an attempt to support oneself as correct. So just more nonsense. This says Physics Girl made the video, okay? There's just no doubt about how this happened, okay? This only happened. I only discovered this huge, gigantic, stinking, smelling pile of crap in the middle of your stupid, retarded, moronic physics, right? I was happy arguing all the other reasons why you're full of shit. You know, your multiverse theory, your relativity crap, your bent space shit, all the other shit, okay? Your stupid wave theory, your stupid entanglement theories, your stupid goddamn photons or, superimposed theories. I love talking about that shit because that's all part of your shit. I mean, that shit you just made up. You got no good evidence for it and you just believe it because you're morons. This stupid pile of shit came up just completely by accident because I'm watching a stupid person doing educational videos and she says something as stupid as, I 100% transferred the momentum, yet I lost half the energy. Too fucking retarded. Nobody can do that. It can't happen in the real universe. You can't possibly lose half your energy and completely convey your energy. That's not possible. Shit. But you people are defending that idiotic notion that I can 100% transfer my momentum and yet somehow I can deform the train. I can create tons of sounds. I can heat up New York City. I can do all kinds of explosive crap. And I don't have to do it with anything called energy because I transferred all my energy. Alright, anyway. Being right has nothing to do with validated science. Well, I think it has everything to do with it. Okay, Newton was right. Leibniz was a stinker. Okay, and here you are defending Leibniz's slander of Newton. And here you are slandering Newton with Leibniz. You're using Leibniz to kill Newton. You're stabbing Newton's poor little corpse with a sword made out of Leibniz. You know, that's got to be Newton's worst fucking nightmare. Oh, this is what the universe is going to do to me? 300 years from now, this is what the fucking universe is going to do to me? I mean, I wish I could reanimate Newton. I mean, it'd be an evil thing to do, but I wish I could, just bring him back for an hour. Just to say, fuck you. Alright. Kinetic energy has been validated in the micro state. So that doesn't mean a macro state. So just more, we have tons of evidence. I just can't provide any. But there's tons and tons of evidence, but I can't give you any. I can't show you any because, somewhere, we lost it somewhere. It's missing. Otherwise, we need to immediately advise NASA. So another lie reference to the fact that somehow NASA used MV squared to land on the moon. You can't produce any evidence of that. You'll never produce any evidence of that, frankly. And the U.S. Air Force, so again, nothing on that Air Force page had a damn thing to do with MV squared, to shut down their systems because they're based in part on kinetic energy, not momentum. So just more horse shit. Any place they use kinetic energy has no place in the sense that it doesn't mean anything. Because if you use kinetic energy formula for anything meaningful, you're going to get wrong answers. Because they need to know, I mean, you're going to think a 10-ton train going 5 miles an hour somehow has less ability to move substance in the universe than a 5-ton train going 10 miles an hour. How could you possibly not understand that that can't be possible? Okay, because they need to know, I mean, just think of it knocking over pins. It's only a certain amount of miles per hour. And so in one object you have a lower velocity, but you have more things hitting. So yeah, this one makes, for every 24 miles an hour this one creates with one hit, this one creates 2 hits with 12 miles an hour. Which is the same thing, you idiots. How can you not understand that? That they can't possibly have different amounts of energy. Oh, shit. There is no valid understanding of the 1/2 scalar. So again, he uses the word scalar again just to play this game. Not a scalar. Just as much of a vector quantity as momentum. In this video's commentary, go to the NASA link. La 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 la. So I don't even know if I want to read this other one. It's just more crap. But anyway, let's go through it quickly. More neutrino mass lack of understanding. The little thought experiment with the rocket and the side thruster is accompanied by the commentary suggesting that the release of pressure creates an opposite direction. No, the release of energy is. So the fact is I even explained it, that there's two phases to even the rocket engine. So this is just, you just keep lying, okay, about what's being argued. And it really is pathetic, okay, because I've made the point that there's really two stages to it. And even if you did the, shoot it with dynamite thing, okay, it kind of proves the point, because I've already pointed out that most energy at its real source, the original source of the energy, is always going to be something like a sun. It's always just going to be an expansion. You're going to take something that's small and you're going to make it big, okay? And it's going to go big in all directions. Now, if I put that inside of a gun, you can sort of understand that, well, the bigness going this way is going to start reflecting. So everything's going to reflect this way and reflect this way. So none of this will go out. None of this direction, right? So all the stuff going this way is going to be converted into stuff going this way or stuff going this way, right? And so you can make the explosion into a vector, you can make it more vector-like in the sense that you can narrow the choices the explosion has. But the fact is, you're still just sending little bits of momentum in a direction, You can't undo the little bits going in a direction. So I can't make these bits go this way. Now, I could bounce them off of something, okay, and then reflect them. But the point is their velocity is going to be so much less by the time they get to this object, the bullet that left this way. You can't possibly get the reflection to hit that bullet because it's already gone. All right, and that's the argument I've made. So the rocket is always sort of dependent. I said the rocket engine is very different than the silly little thrusters, right? The silly little thruster things just move the rocket. So this is the substance of his argument. Okay, there's these little rockets here on the sides. You put these little pressure, and all they're going to do is shoot pressure out. So they're just going to release a pressurized gas and shoot it out like a fire extinguisher, just like the movie Gravity, right? I pointed out it's just like the movie Gravity. So the rocket engine is depending on, yes, you're pushing pressure out, so you're obviously losing some pressure in this direction. So that's part of what you're gaining. You're releasing pressure in a direction. But what you're magnifying it by expanding the gas here, by igniting it. And so by expanding it inside of this cone, you're forcing all the energy going in these directions to turn into energy in this direction. All right. And likewise, the other side's doing this. And the amount going this way will equal the amount going that way. Okay? But that's where you're really getting it from, is the fact that you've created an energy source, an explosion, and you're standing on one side of the explosion. So you sent out a piece of stuff. So I could do it up here. I could send out a piece of stuff, okay, dynamite, and then I could explode the dynamite out here. Well, I'm going to get moved by my half of the dynamite explosion, right? And the other half of the explosion is going to go into space. But I'm going to get my half of it, so I'm going to get definitely moved by it. And that's all that the rocket engine is, just maximizing your capacity to get energy out of that explosion by putting a cone and collecting as much of the explosion as possible. Now, when they do the thruster thing, like I said, when they do the thing to just turn the ship this way or that way, so that's where the analogy of shooting the dime out this side and the 2 kilograms at 1 mile an hour out the other side, you're going to get the same amount of thrust out of that. Now, yeah, because you're again doing the same thing. You're either creating an explosive to do it, or you're releasing pressure that you've already stored to do it. But you have to release something of you. And if you're going to release something of you, you have to push it. And as soon as you push this way, you're automatically gave away this way. So as soon as you do this, I've already given my hand away, so to speak. I pushed it out that way. I gave it away. As soon as I gave it away, I already got the equal and opposite reaction, in the sense that I gave away this, I'm still got stuff inside of me going this way. So if I give away this way, so I'm at equilibrium, I give away one of these, well, now I have an imbalance here. I have 2 going this way and only 1 going this way, so now I'm going to go that way. I don't need an opposite reaction. That was the point being made. So what else does... All right, so the only thing in this article he's going to link to is the fact that, it's not an article. It's just one of the silly NASA videos, the ones I said were, for kids. And that's all they are. She has a little stuffed animal. They actually put a stuffed animal inside the space station. It's a little stuffed animal. Pathetic, really. But anyway, no. And when you think how much it costs per pound to send anything into space, you know, it's just like, oh, really? So that was worth $23,000. Your little green frog was worth $23,000. I don't think so. All right. So yeah, the problem is it's the center of gravity. So yes, obviously the thrusters have to compensate for the point where they are and where you are positioned relative to your center of gravity. So obviously if you just turn this thruster on, you might end up just spinning as well as going this way. So you'll get energy in this direction, but because your center of mass is down here, you're turning one half of your mass more than you're turning the other half of your mass, and so you're also going to start rotating. So you obviously have to push out some energy in some other direction to compensate for the fact that you might be spinning. And this was a real issue in landing on the moon, is because the lunar module has all kinds of, it has all kinds of ability to start spinning all over the place. So they had to have 4 of these little thrusters, and they had to, they had to be controlled by a computer, because only a computer could figure out how to compensate for the fact that the men could be sitting in their chairs, and so the center of gravity is different than if they're sitting up looking out the window. So depending on where they were positioned inside the lunar module, the spacecraft had to figure that out and say, well, now it's changed my center of gravity, and so now I have to change how much thrust I put out any one side, because I'm going to start spinning. But whatever. So there's nowhere in my videos I'm denying that it's a little more complicated than just shooting the stuff out the side of the ship. Yes, you do have to worry about your center of mass. Duh. So this is just more bullshit. You got me on nothing. Okay, more lack of understanding. A little thought experiment with the rocket and the side thrusters is accompanied by the commentary suggesting that the release of pressure creates the opposite direction. So again, that's not what I said. What I said is an explosion goes both ways. You don't need an opposite reaction because you're already shooting something this way and shooting something that way. And yeah, of course that's going to look like an opposite reaction, but it's not an opposite reaction. The gun isn't an opposite reaction to the bullet. The gun moving, okay, the recoil is the action from the explosion. It's gotten its half of the explosion. Half the explosion went this way, half the explosion went that way. All right. The implication of Newton third at work here, which is completely false. Blah, blah, blah. Says you. Once the rocket is out of Earth's gravitational field, there is no equal contrary action. So he's the one now asserting that Newton's law doesn't hold in space. Now, isn't that exactly what I said? So isn't that ironic? I said if you take it out to space, you can do away with this whole equal and opposite reaction, because you'll sort of understand that all you need to do is release something. All you need to do is shoot something out and give it away, and you're going to change your motion. All right, the whole premise of pressure and reflection in space here is a complete and total validation of Newton. So I'm not the one in conflict. You are. Your guys are. What is happening is that the center of balance is being changed inside the rocket. Well, that's a tiny percentage of what's happening. The real fact is that it's motion in a direction. And clearly, if you're not pushing on the center of gravity, you'll cause not only motion in the direction, but you'll cause rotation. So both effects will happen, which changes direction or can cause an out of control spin. Yes, but the spin will still be controlled, and that the spin will still be in the right direction. Okay, bad semantics on my part for the lack of an advanced mathematical documentation. I don't even know what that means. By the way, Newton discusses these issues in the Principia and gives insight in the definition section of centripetal force. So this isn't any insight, okay? Centripetal force doesn't have much to do with the fact that you're changing a center of gravity and you're disproportionately moving part of the mass versus the other part of the mass. So that's just horse shit. All right, so this was the page. It's just complete. It's just one of these space shuttle goofy-doo bullshit videos. Okay, look, little critter she has with her. That's what she took up to the space station.
In space.
So she could do
Value for
kids videos.
Me, the space station, We are all constantly falling.
Right. So this is so rudimentary, you know, the whole idea of I've got enough velocity, then I'm falling at the perfect rate, and if I can do that, it's called an orbit, and I could just stay in the orbit and fall into the Earth. So they're not really in no gravity, they're in free fall. She doesn't even say that, which is the funny part. She should just say, yes, okay, it looks like I'm in a location where the gravity of the Earth isn't reaching us. But clearly, no, we are in gravity. We're just falling in the gravity. We're not, you know. But technically, we're still being accelerated. It's just that we're moving faster than the fall rate. So we keep missing the Earth. Well, she did say that part. All right, so there's nothing of value in this mush. Okay, so here's where she just gets to the fact that if she pokes on something unevenly, okay, then it will not travel in the distance in the straight line.
The system translates down, but it also starts to rotate.
Right, so, but it's translating down on the right path. So the point is the energy still has the right vector. It's just that inside the object there's unevenness. So the object has some evenness, but the center of gravity did move in the right direction. All right, so no point in going into all that mush. So again, this doesn't prove kinetic energy, right? This isn't that video doesn't have anything to do with kinetic energy. So this one's more of a third law argument, and it doesn't really have anything to do with that either. Anyway, as for how thrust is different inside the Earth's gravitational field, outside the field, another advanced topic which should be learned in the classroom and lab. So he doesn't explain any of that. Again, before anyone believes anything on YouTube here, I suggest contacting the John Glenn Propulsion Facility in Cleveland. Oh yeah, I'm sure they'll be terribly interested. And certainly do not believe me, as I have not presented any credentials for professional reasons. So again, he's implying he has a credential. Escaped a lunatic. Uncredited YouTube science videos are not real science. So again, I'm saying real science isn't real science. That's the laughable joke. Leibniz science isn't real science. Voodoo science is not real science. This fake, phony, bullshit kinetic energy theorem is bullshit. It's nonsense. Accredited science videos are a basic introduction to the subject matter only. Only believe our bishops because they have funny hats. As stated in an earlier comment, college physics, first, second years gets through the Newtonian mechanics. So, and again, gets through it with what? Bent space? Oh, space is bent, yeah. That's what causes gravity. It's a bendy thing. There's no real force. Yeah, that's really interesting. Okay, a student must have mastered the algebra series. Yeah, it's good to know some math, but guess what? See, right here he says geometry. All of it has to do with geometry. So all of this stuff, you can model it. And then you don't need calculus. See, if I want to know something, about what the volume of the energy is I use, then I can just go like this. I can make the graph, and then I can just make a physical object the same size as the graph and fill it with water, and I can know how much volume it is. I mean, there's lots of ways I can get around it by just moving the geometric pieces around. I can just cut it into a bunch of triangles and then reform the triangles into a square. And then I can know exactly what the volume is. Lots of ways I can just do it without any of this mathematical crap. And as I've just pointed out, how much credibility can any of their mathematics have when they'll play this game with scalar and vector quantity? When they'll try to convince you that somehow the kinetic energy formula doesn't have a direction. I mean, they're actually asserting that somehow it doesn't tell you, there's no direction in that formula. And somehow the momentum formula, just writing a P, there, I've established that it has a direction because I wrote the letter P. No, I didn't establish that, did I? No. It's just so bad. All right, well, I'll just read the last paragraph. I will just comment here on Newton. While the pieces of calculus were demonstrated by Descartes and other mathematicians before Newton and Leibniz, it is blogging to my mind how this man in the 17th century was able to construct calculus. Okay, so it's a nice little, giving Newton credit for doing something rather remarkable in terms of having no one to really instruct him and for him to find this insight that allowed him to find a way to a shortcut. So fine. Again, what does that have to do with this argument? You're the one, in my opinion, slandering Newton by saying his worst enemy was right, and that somehow this kinetic energy formula has some kind of credibility, which is nothing. It's just nonsense. So Piro, I guess, thought this guy was talking to him. So he says, once a rocket is out of Earth's gravitational field, there's no equal contrary action. And then Piro says, that's not what that means. Well, that's what he said, so you can't say he said what he said doesn't mean what he said. The equal and opposite reaction is you throw the rocket fuel in one direction, but you go in the other. Duh, Piro. And the whole point is what makes you go in the other direction? Does the thing you pushed push you back, or is it the fact that you gave away this way and now you're stuck with an imbalance inside of yourself? If I give you my momentum, I don't need you to stop me. I already stopped because I don't have any fuel. Duh. Do you have any proof that that's not the right answer? No, you don't. Let's see, but you're going the other. Works perfectly in space or anywhere. So clearly it's quite different. In fact, space will give you a better understanding of the dynamics because there are less things messing it up, like atmosphere and all that kind of crap. So it clearly makes it a lot more understandable how tiny and subtle all the interactions are, that you just barely have to touch something to make it move. Okay, so anyway, it has nothing to do with pressure. Of course, it has everything to do with pressure. It has to do with stuff moving in directions, and if they're in opposite directions, the things are going to move in opposite directions. They're going to move apart. Anyway, so enough of a video, blah, 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 blah. Peace. All right. So he's more of a jerk than I thought, frankly. But anyway, who cares? It's all there are, jerks on this planet. Jerkiest planet in the solar system, I'd say.